Recording?
Yeah. Sweet.
Okay. So the burlap, purpose of the burlap is to prevent the clay from sticking to the table. It's most important when you're starting and you're creating your base, because you're actually going to roll out a slab for your base. And when you're putting that pressure on the clay, it's probably going to stick to that table. So you want to keep this down to prevent the clay from sticking to the table. Whatever clay you are not using, keep it in that bag. Clay does dry pretty quickly. You guys found that yesterday when you had the clay on your table. I mean, it turned leather hard by the end of class. And so if you were to leave this bag open, that clay is going to dry well before the end of class. So make sure that whatever you're not using, you go ahead and put off to the side. Water bowl mostly is actually going to be used for your slip. If you guys recall, is that muddy, wet clay. So all you're going to do is just take a few chunks of clay, small ones. I like to break them up a little bit. Just plunk them in that bowl. Again, 1 per table is fine, maybe 2 per table. You don't need a ton of it. That slip is going to become the glue when you start to add on other pieces of clay together. But it's important to get it in there early so that it has time to kind of soak up that moisture and get a little bit more wet and poopy and gloppy. So if we're actually getting started, you will start with the base and then ultimately work your way up. To create your base, rather than using coils in that snake technique, we're going to use a slab technique. And we're simply just going to roll the clay out. What these spacers are going to do is they're going to prevent the clay from getting pancake paper thin, which you guys have probably experienced if you've ever rolled clay before. It gets super, super thin and you can't control it. Spacers are obviously going to give us that specific and uniform thickness. So when you're rolling that clay, you're going to want to start in the middle and slowly work your way outward. Don't smash the pin roller into the middle of it and then try to roll it out like that. It's not going to work. So medium pressure outward. If you notice that, oh no, it's getting too long and I wanted to maybe be more round, just roll it back up again. And this time, roll a little bit this way, rotate it, roll a little bit that way, rotate it. So that way you're going to have more of a round area. Now what I recommend, if you want a perfect shape for your base, say like a square or a circle, go ahead and trace that out onto a sheet of paper, cut that exact shape out, and place it on here and trace it with the knife. That way you're going to know that it's going to be an exact circle. So just like you would with a template, the only thing is we can't use the templates on the clay just because they get so dirty so fast. So we've got to make our own template out of paper. Since I'm just going to go organic and freeform with you guys here, we'll just pretend that I've traced out my circle. Oh, it's a perfect circle. Beautiful. This knife's going to be plenty fine to cut the clay when it's really, really moist. There are dulled out X-Acto knives when the clay gets a little bit harder, or if you want a really precise exact cut, these will work quite well. Still be careful with these when you're cutting. They're sharp, but they're not as sharp as the other ones. They can still cut you. We're actually done with these. You won't need these anymore for the project. So, put it off to the side. When you're making that cut for your base, it's important that you keep that knife pretty perpendicular to the surface. So I'm not angling it like this. You can imagine if I was cutting like this, what it's going to do to that edge, it's going to be very beveled. And you want your base to, for the most part, be pretty up and down. I'm just going to cut all the way around. Cut out like that. Got my base ready to go. Now, for most things considered, we're going to go ahead and remove our burlap since we're done rolling that. We're now going to transfer it over to our bat. You're going to keep your project on the bat the whole time that you're working on it. And the reason we're going to do that is if you were to try to bring this back over when you have 6 inches of clay on there, it's not a very sturdy surface. This is going to guarantee that your clay is going to remain on a sturdy surface when you're transferring it, moving it, or even just turning it on your table like that. It's much easier to manage. Of course, when you have the base cut out, you're really going to want to make sure that you've cleaned everything up and made it perfectly smooth. Again, the clay dries. So a lot of students seem to think that, oh, I'll just go back and clean that later. I'll go back and I'll clean that up later. When the clay is dry, you don't have the ability to clean it up as nice and neat. So every stage that you're working, every coil that you're putting on, you're going to want to get that in the exact spot, the exact way that you want it before moving on. So there isn't that opportunity to come back later on and fix things. So, I would spend the time now. I prefer using my hands more than the tools, honestly. But experiment with the tools, experiment with your hands, and figure out what's going to work best for you. But just smoothing it out. You don't and you won't need a whole lot of water for smoothing because the clay is going to be so moist. Again, get used to the word moist. I'm saying it a lot. But we'll just say that that is perfect, ready to go, exactly what I want. So that being off to the side, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the actual making of the coils. So we'll just envision that my project starting off just has 3 rings of straight coils on there. I won't get into any of the fancy coil making, but I'll be happy to show that to you on an individual basis. So for making those coils, again, I should probably put this back in the bag because it might dry, but it'll be okay for now. Take a small chunk of clay. You don't need a ton. Your goal is to not make the longest possible coil ever. You only want to make it long enough to go around whatever your base is. And so when you're rolling that coil out, it's probably a whole lot easier to actually stand up because you can feel the pressure right on top. You're going to want to be using this portion of your hand right here, not your fingers. Your fingers are a very rough and uneven surface, and that's going to give you a rough and uneven coil. And with medium pressure, you're just going to want to work left and right, left and right. And the key is constant movement, and you're not lifting your hand. You're not doing this, lifting it up and down. My hand is not coming off the clay. It's touching it consistently, moving back and forth. And I'm really feeling how thick the clay is, because you want that coil to be relatively even. And honestly, I could do this without even looking at the clay itself. I could look at you guys this whole time, and I can feel that it's getting a little bit thinner over here on this end. It's a little bit thicker right here. And so wherever it needs to be, say, a little bit thinner, you're just going to use a little bit more pressure. But you're not going to stay in one spot, because very quickly, you're going to get that. And when you're starting off, and if you haven't made coils before, you're going to get that from time to time. Don't worry. Just take it off. And so let's say that that coil is perfect. It's pretty darn close. Obviously, it's not long enough anymore. We'll just pretend that it is long enough. Ideally, that coil is going to wrap around, and it's going to connect end to end. And so what you'll want to do, you can see that, generally it's going to taper at the end and get a little bit thinner. So to prevent that, you're going to want to go ahead and cut just a little bit off each end. Bless you, bless you. That way, when it connects back around, that coil is going to be even. And that's important because if you have little dips there, and you have a little dip on every single layer, when you have 13, 14, maybe 42 coils, in all these different dips and areas, your project's going to be leaning and weaving and be very gloppy. So we'll just say that that is perfect. I know it's not exactly perfect. So, next, probably the most important thing, when you're attaching clay to other clay, there's 3 things to remember, 3 S's, and that's score, slip, and seam. Now you already know slip, that's that glue. Scoring is where you're taking this little tiny rake tool. Let's zoom in. 3D glasses, that'd be much better. You're taking this little rake tool, and what you're going to do is you're just going to rough the surface a little bit. Now when the clay is really moist, this step isn't as crucial, but if the clay is a little bit closer to the leather hard stage, or it's just getting a little bit drier, it's much, much more important to have this texture here so that the clay has something to grip onto and bind to each other. And you'll just go ahead and do a little bit of that on both pieces. Ready to go. And I like to use this tool to apply the slip because it's got little pokers. And I'm just going to stab some of that wet, nasty clay, goopy gloppiness, and just paint it on. Not very much, you can see. Just dip it back in the water. You're not using a lot of water. Water's not dripping all over the place. If you have too much water or using a lot of water, it's going to ruin the stability of your base or the stability of the sculpture itself. And again, just ruin the integrity of it, and it might not stand up in the end. So, got my scoring, got my slipping. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this piece on, get exactly where I need it. Maybe a little bit of downward pressure, just to kind of push those seams and scoring together. Slip and scoring together. Last step is seaming. And so in the examples I showed you yesterday, those artists in the very early stages of coil creation were seaming the complete outside edge. They were smoothing all those cracks together so that nothing would leak through. For your project, rather than smoothing inside and outside, you're just going to want to smooth that inside. So you're going to be seaming the inside section. And these tools are probably the best for that. When the project gets a little bit higher, it's kind of harder to get in there. You might be using your hands or your fingers instead. But all you're going to be doing for seaming is taking a little bit of that coil and just dragging it down and smoothing it to the inside of the project. So I know it's called seaming, but what you're actually doing is removing the seam from the piece that you are attaching. So you're going to work all the way around and make sure that it is attached together. Now, if you know that you're not going to have a lot of negative space there and you're not going to be able to see the inside of that part of the project, it's fine like that. No one's going to see the inside, that's okay. But if you know that you're going to have a big opening right here, then you better take the time to use this tool and actually smooth things out. So now I'm going to go left to right and just smooth that out, make it pretty on the inside. Because we're all pretty on the inside. Like so. And my outside's close enough, so I'll just move on. No! Got to get that outside exactly where it needs to be because it will dry. So where there are little visible score marks that I made, again, you can use this tool, smooth that out. I might use my finger just on this a little bit to smooth it. Again, the tendency is to just glob your hands full of water and just smear that all over it. You really don't want to use water if at all possible. Maybe just a touch like that, but not much. And just smoothing. Again, making that clean, crisp, in exactly the way that you would want it to. And so for working into your next coil, it's going to be no different. So you're going to make that coil. Maybe I'll do something a little bit different on this one. And I'm working rather fast because I've done this before, but when you're starting with that coil, you're probably going to work a little bit slower. Again, notice where I'm rolling on my hand. It's right here to the, I guess, backside of your knuckles and to the bottom of the palm. Kind of rocking my hand up and down. Getting that where it needs to be. Cut my edge. So, maybe we'll plan on doing something a little bit different with this one. Maybe we'll do this. Call this the brain because it reminds me of a picture of a brain. Got that piece ready. I'm going to go ahead and just score where it's going to be attached. Score the bottom. So, make sure those good pieces slip. And of course I'd want to make sure if I was keeping this level that those curls are all the same height. And I could maybe intentionally make one a lot higher, say like this. And then when I'm doing my next coil, maybe I want that coil to actually drape down and create negative space right there. So obviously that, that's possible, that's potential. Make sure that I seam this on the inside so that it stays attached. Seaming is a step that a lot of students seem to think they can just not do. And I will warn you that if you have pieces that aren't seamed, especially when you're using like spheres or circles, those will most likely just fall off in the kiln. What happens when the clay gets fired is it actually shrinks, I want to say like by 8%. And so if you just have a coil like this and a coil like this with no seaming, nothing that's attaching it, when this shrinks by 8% and that shrinks by 8%, you get a tiny little gap in between them. And so they're just sitting on top of each other. Nothing is attached. They've shrunken just a little bit. And when you take it out of the kiln, you're just going to have fired pieces of clay that aren't actually attached to each other. So you've got to ensure, again, that that inside is smooth, ready to go. Now, cleaning up, storing, and all of that good stuff, there's a green bucket next to the sink. So not in the sink, but next to the sink. Any clay that has dried up, you can go ahead and put in that bucket. Remember, that clay is reusable. You guys know because you made clay. That bucket will fill up by the time that we're done. All we have to do is fill that bucket with water, turn it back into slip, and then add more of that particulate clay, that earthenware clay, and we can bring it right back to this state. So don't throw any clay out. Put it in that green bucket down there. So for storing the project itself, you know what I forgot? I forgot a damp paper towel, and I'll add that to your guys' list. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a paper towel, fill it with water, wring all of the water out of it, and just gently place it over your project. Again, we have to make sure that the clay is going to stay moist over the night, especially over the weekend, so that it doesn't dry out. That extra bag, oh, there it is. Adrian getting one for me? Thanks, Adrian. Perfect. Thank you, sir. So there should be no water left in it. So wring it completely out like that. And it doesn't have to be on there touching every little bit of area. Just covering it loosely, because you don't want to mash that on there, of course. And then I'm going to take this guy, slide it into your bag, like so. Your extra clay, make sure that that extra clay is balled up in a single tight ball and the bag is tightly wound around it. Smaller pieces of clay that are a lot thinner are going to dry a lot faster. So by keeping all your clay compact and not allowing air in the bag, it's going to ensure that it's going to stay moist. You're then going to want to tie that bag like so, and then very carefully bring this over. We'll have room. I'm guessing the cheetah cabinet's still going to be full, so we'll probably end up storing them back around on those 2 empty shelves next to the kiln. When you're storing it back there, and I should even say this, before you have a bag on it, put your name on the bag, get a piece of masking tape, do something so that you know that it's yours, because every single project is going to look exactly like this back over there. And the last thing you want to be doing is opening up other people's projects, moving other people's projects around. So make sure you got your name on it so you know where it goes. Someone's going to do this, and I see it every year. You want to, and when you have a bag, you want to hold it by the handle, but all that did is just ruin everything that I just did. It fell over, toppled over, so make sure that you're holding it flat like this, and then storing it over there. And be careful, too, when you're storing things on the shelf not to bump other people's projects, because even doing this, I probably just knocked off an inch off someone's project. So just be very mindful of other people's work. Tools themselves, if they've got a little bit of clay on them, just scrape them off, put them in your slip right there, and then these will all just go back in the containers over there where you got them from. Slip water itself, you can just dump the water off into the sink, but if there's a lot of clay in there, like really muddy clay water, you can just dump that into that green bucket down on the floor. Again, the water's not going to hurt it. Tables, just like with plaster, we're going to have to wipe them down. Dry paper towel first, then a damp paper towel, and then back to the dry, so wax on, wax off. Questions on that so far? Probably not. You will have questions. Best thing I can say is experiment a little bit, even while you're getting your ideas down. So go ahead and get some clay out, feel it, see what's going to happen. If you have this great idea for putting this ornate design, play around with it, see if that's going to work. You might find that it's going to be super easy. You might find that that is going to be super difficult. So plenty of clay over there to use, and we've got tons of extra clay.